inventor. Scott Suter received his doctorate in American Civilization from the George Washington University in 1994. In addition to now serving as Rocktown History's curator, he has worked as a folklorist and museum consultant and is professor of English and American Studies at Bridgewater College. We are very happy to take advantage of his study of the white oak basket making tradition this evening. Ready?
I think so. I'm losing my.
I hear that. What's up with that?
I know that's what caused it.
It gets very comfortable. Can I have these backwards?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Everything's backwards this evening.
I'm colorblind, so I can't tell. And I can't do math.
Sorry, I can cut this part out. All right.
Is that good?
Again,
Well, thank you all for coming and for sitting at home as well. Yeah, so years ago, like in 1990 through 1992, so I really mean years ago, I was doing more work as a folklorist, and I became really interested in the white oak basket making tradition here in the Shenandoah Valley. And so what I'd like to do today is first sort of talk about, as you can see, the title is Documenting Tradition. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's been done in the past, and then sort of move into the work that I did and the people that I met in the early 90s. And I continued to know them for the next decade or so. I just ended up doing other work. And so some of you may be familiar with Alan Eaton's work from 1937, Handicrafts of the Southern Highlands. He briefly mentions white oak basket makers. Arthur Rothstein, who was a photographer for the government during the WPA years, his first assignment was to go up into the land that was going to become the national park and document the people who lived there. So we'll see a few images from him. And also there was a couple who were also folklorists, Chuck and Nan Perdue. Chuck was a professor of anthropology at UVA, and Nan also taught there. They did a lot of work in the 80s on basket making, so I'll be talking about them a little bit as well. I did a survey right out of, out of coursework for the graduate degree. I got hired by the state of Virginia to do a survey of folk life in the Shenandoah Valley. They were doing a survey of South Side and also the Northern Neck, and they hired me to do the Shenandoah Valley. And this is where I first met, basket making, but also the basket makers themselves. So I did that survey, and then I moved away, worked in Pittsburgh for a year or so, and then was coming back here, and I applied and got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to continue this work with basket makers. And so I did that. I did a lot of documentation throughout the state, not just in the Valley. And then I applied for another grant to make a film, and that one didn't go through. And then, you know, as Robert Frost says, way leads on to way, and I started doing other stuff and ended up here tonight. So I always loved this quotation from Bill Cook, who's one of the basket makers we will meet. I love to tear a tree apart and put it back together the way I want to. You know, and this, any of you know Bill Cook? Ever meet him? He was quite a character. We'll talk about it. This is a nice stock internet photo of the white oak tree. And these guys were very particular. You couldn't make a basket out of anything but white oak. I mean, it had to be that, and it needed to be about a tree about 6 to 8 inches around, and otherwise you couldn't pull it apart. And they really did. That's what they did. They cut a tree down and then start taking it apart, and then, as Bill says, put it back together again. So here are some of the Arthur Rothstein photos. The gentleman making the baskets is John Nicholson. He is one of the sort of fathers of the Shenandoah Valley tradition, although he comes from a long line of basket makers too, which I'll talk about in a moment. But he was living up on the mountain, and was one of the families, well, as they all were, who got moved out, whether they wanted to or not. So there they went. That's another presentation, though. So one of the things that these folks did, I mean, they didn't need that many baskets, right? So why are they making baskets? Well, because even by this time, which would have been in the 1930s, they were sending stuff down out of the mountain for sale, and people, there was a market for white oak baskets coming out of the mountains. And so it wasn't as if they were just subsisting up there, making them, keeping themselves alive by growing crops and things, but they were doing stuff. And I bring that up because that's one of the arguments that was made at the time for why they should be moved out, was because they didn't know anything, and they were ignorant, and we would be doing them a great favor if we took away their homes and put them somewhere where they could be educated and things. And all the evidence shows that, in fact, they were quite smart and enjoying their lives and functioning quite well. Here's another, this is a good slide because it shows some of the forms that they were making, right? And were obviously very functional, some of them not as functional, but still useful, right? Like this basket, I'm sure is still being made somewhere. Yes, is my light not shining? Oh yes, the light, the photo in the upper right-hand corner. Yes, thanks for pointing that out. So yeah, this was 1935. John Nicholson of Nicholson Hollow doing some work. This is a basket stand that was on Route 211 at the top of the Massanutten Mountain. And my mother and my aunt are here. I'll just point out that my grandmother took that photo. I found it in the box of photos one time, and she said, well, we went to Luray Caverns, and I just took that picture. So I'm estimating, she didn't remember what year it was, but that was the year. And, for me, who was just absolutely interested in all of this, to find that connection, that was pretty nice. But it's a great photo. You can tell it's a marketed object, right? I mean, look at that hut, built out of tree bark, made to look like a basket. You can see there were cabins there wherever that particular thing was. So clearly baskets being made and marketed, not just for function. Now this is a fun photo with a story. Another thing I did for the Virginia Folklife Program was go around to archives and look for anything relative to folklife that hadn't been documented. And then I was at the Library of Virginia looking through their photo collections, and I found this photo and a couple others, which I'll also show you. They were unidentified, had no notes or anything. And so at that time, I had been working with the basket makers. So I made photocopies and asked them to send me, a photographic copy. And I started going around to show it to these basket makers. One of the people whom you'll meet, Elmer Price, was the first person I encountered. And I said, you know who any of these people are? And he said, well, hell yeah. there's me, there's my brother, there's my mother, there's my baby sister, there's my father, there's my other brother, and there's my other sister. I was like, really? Yeah, where'd you get this? He told me exactly where it was on Route 211 east of Luray. They would set up there, sell baskets, and make them by the side of the road. And you can see they've got all the stuff around there. So that was really cool. Now, I think you can see in the far right of the photo the old Ford that's there. And one of the things that Elmer told me about, and then later some of the other basket makers, was that they made a basket called a running board basket. And it was so that you could put it on the running board and it wouldn't take up room in the car. And they were still making them, um, or they were in the 90s. This Elmer Price made this example, and you can see how long, narrow fits on there. You rope it down and all of that. He also told me that those cars had those big headlights that stuck out on the front, and then lights on the back, and that when they would go as far as they could into the mountain where they could get trees, and they would cut the tree, and then they would rope them onto the car, having it sit on the lights, the headlights and the taillights, because they stuck out so much. So it was a lot of fun stories to hear from all of these people. Excuse me. Here's another photo I found in the Library of Virginia State Chamber of Commerce collection. Also unidentified. So I was taking it around with me. This was identified by Bill Cook as a guy named George Shiflett, who was not a basket maker, but a buyer and obviously a seller and a marketer. And this is at Lacey Spring. If you drive out there, you can pretty much see exactly where this is still on the road. In this photo, I want to point out the baskets, the larger baskets that are right in the center. There's these 1, 2, 3. People always told me they were called feather baskets, but the basket makers called them jug. And I have a couple here. Watch out. So these are all baskets from Rocktown History's collection. This is obviously an example, probably made, might have been one of those that's in the photo. This was made by William Bubby Nichols. Nichols. In around 1940, his son identified that to me. And then his son, whom we'll also meet, made this one for the museum back in the 90s on the pattern of his father's there. But other basket makers could make that form too, but Bubby Nichols was well known for making that particular form. Here's another photo I found at the library, unidentified, possibly someone named Rob Miller. This is on a roadside stand along Route 250 on Afton Mountain. So they were clearly going up into the mountain, coming back out. And this is a nice mixture. You can see baskets that we are more accustomed to in the right foreground. There is a large white oak basket. And then here's what is called they would call it a flower basket. The man is holding a flower basket and the woman is holding a small one. Thank you. Well, it's okay. Let's see. More documentation. National Geographic, July 1949, had a big spread on Appalachia, and these are two of the Rockingham, well, not both, but Sam Price, whom you saw in the earlier photo with his family, and the woman on the right is Nellie McDormand, who lived at Lilly up near Clover Hill. Um, when I was doing the folk life survey, I interviewed her daughter, whose name was Naomi Schwartz, and she was still using that loom, making rag rugs. Eventually, I had an exhibit here when this whole building opened up, or the original part of the building, and Naomi had passed away by then, but her son, Roy Schwartz, some of you may know him, and her grandson came to the opening of the exhibit, and they wove rugs on the loom. And we have one of her looms down in the um, exhibit, on the permanent exhibit. So something to do with weaving, whether it's white oak or uh, fabric. Now, now we get to this sort of social sciencey looking stuff. Um, this is work, as you can see, by the Purdue's back in 1982. They did all kinds of work. This is the genealogy portion of the show. Um, and since I know you can't read it, I just wanted to put it up here just because it's sort of impressive to look at. It looks kind of like if you look at the inside of a computer or something, one of those little chips. Um, let me make sure I can find this. So what they did at the very top left over here is a guy whose name was, I think, yes, John Nicholson. He was born in 1794 in Cumberland County, England, and he's the progenitor of all of these Nicholsons who lived on the mountains in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then eventually the people who I met were in this long line of people too. I'm not going to try to explain all of this, but I have a more viewable slide, I think, coming up. Um, yeah, this is my distillation for our purposes. Hopefully you can read that a little better. But you can see at the very top, I said John Nicholson. It's Thomas Nicholson, born in 1704. So 1794 was when he died. But um, you get all these people that we don't know until we get down to near the long line across, second line up, third line up from the bottom. Joseph S. and Lucy M. Cook had these children, which included Jake Cook, William Cody Cook, Max Cook, Rose Price, who was the mother in that photo by the roadside, and they all then came down to James and Shirley and Bill Cook, and then Elmer Price, Max, and Jesse. Those three sons could all make baskets. And another cousin who came from here was this was um, William Bubby Nichols, and he had two sons, Ernest and John, whom we'll see images of, and Gregory, a grandson. These all go back to that guy at the top and his wife in 18th century England. So it's quite a tradition that comes down. The knowledge passed on from family member to family member. It's quite amazing. Um, let's see what else. Yeah, so this is about the time I encountered these guys. So Cody and Lucy Cook had died. I knew James, I knew Bill, I knew Elmer, I knew Jesse, I knew Ernest, and I knew John, and I interviewed all of them, and I knew Phil and Kathy Sheets and Greg Nicholas. These are all people that I interviewed and collected their baskets. And so I came up on the scene. First, I met Bill Cook, and it was kind of funny because I met him at a craft show at Belgrove, and I was just started doing that survey, and I was like, wow, okay, cool. Talked to him for a while, and I said, is there anybody else doing this that I should talk to? And he said, nope, I'm the only basket maker there is. And I said, okay. So, I was like, yeah, okay, because I didn't know. Um, of course, then I found there were others, right? And um, by the time that I went and interviewed Bill, and I interviewed all of these people numerous times. So I interviewed Bill, sort of got to know him. We got off to a good start, and then I, of course, found these other people. Well, the next time I went back to see Bill, he said, "I heard you're making the rounds." I was like, "Yep, yep," And he said, "I want to explain what I meant when I said I was the only basket maker around." I said, "Okay," I wasn't going to ask him, but he said, "Now, there are lots of people who can build a basket, but I'm the only person that if you come to me and say, I want a basket that looks like this, I can build it for you. And the others, yeah, they can make baskets, but like they can make one form, and that's what they do." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's cool." And he was not entirely correct, but more or less. But I liked his saving his face there a little bit. It was kind of nice. Um, so here's what was going on. Some of you may have heard of Cody and Lucy Cook. Their baskets are still around. They were living in Luray, selling baskets in various shops. Someone from Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, saw their baskets in a shop. I think it was over on 250, like called Cloverdale or something, and said, "Oh, we ought to get these people to come to Colonial Williamsburg," and so they did. And they were there in the late 60s into the 70s, and then there were some health issues, and so they needed to come back to Luray, and they did. But what happened was they the people at Williamsburg said, "Well, could we keep getting your baskets?" And they said, "Sure," but they couldn't keep up, so they got their cousins to make baskets. And I just want to read one thing from something the Purdue's wrote in their 1982 article. So um, to meet the demand, uh, they they have increasingly depended upon their extended kin network to produce baskets for them on commission, and which are then marketed as the products of the cooks. We have been told that William Cody's brother, Max, that was Bill Cook's father, produced baskets under this arrangement until he died. Several of their own children and grandchildren, several nephews, sons of William Cody's late brother Jake, as well as a nephew's wife and brother-in-law, have all reportedly worked for the Cooks under this arrangement with much bitterness and anger in the family over their share of the proceeds from the sale of these baskets. All the while, Lucy protests vigorously that she and William Cody are nearly the last basket builders left in the state of Virginia. So they were very protective, right? But they had this uh, profitable deal going on. So uh, Cody and Lucy would gather up everybody's baskets, then they would take them to Williamsburg and get whatever they could for them, and they were sold as cook baskets from Shenandoah Valley. But they never identified who any of the other people were. And so by the time I got there, they were writing in 1982. So you figure I got there about 8 years later. There was still all of this animosity going on. And when I would go to one guy, he would be like, don't talk to him, And um, it made it a little difficult, but it was still kind of interesting. Um, so what happened? The Cooks, Cody and Lucy, finally, I think, got to where they couldn't do it anymore. So Bill Cook, I'll show you some images of Bill, was a truck driver, but he knew how to make baskets too. And he said, "You know what? This seems pretty good. I'm tired of driving a truck. I'm going to make baskets." And so he picked up where the other cooks left off. And so he started getting people, his cousins, to make baskets for him. And he was supplying Williamsburg. Um, and so it was just kind of interesting political aspects that I had to go through to get this. But one of the things I'm really pleased about is that by the time I finished, which like 3 years of very intense interviews with these guys, they all sort of lightened up and were like talking about each other and, oh, I was over to see so and so, you know. So I feel like I played some kind of a role in their lives. Um, yeah, so I wanted to show you this again because what I'd like to do now is sort of talk about the people that I met and interviewed and who made most of these baskets up here, not the old ones. Um, so one thing I wanted to point out was right in the center of this photograph where Sam Price is sitting holding a basket. You can see it has the really large high handle on it. This is an old example from our collection, and you can see same form, right? Um, this one that sits to the back there that I can't quite reach, which is just a bigger version of the one I just held up. Some of you can't see it, but it's there. Um, also, same form, and then this is a basket. Okay, that was the farthest one anyway. Um, this basket Bill Cook made in the 90s. And you can see it's got the same sort of form, but he liked to play with forms. He was right. He could make many, many different things and enjoyed that. Um, they called this form, the basket makers called that form a funeral basket because you could put, you know, big flower bouquets in them. So um, here's Elmer Price. He lived in Newmarket when I met him and was going to visit him. He had a career working at Bowman Apples in Mount Jackson and started making, had always kept making baskets, but in retirement made even more. Um, he was very proud of being able to make really good baskets. I showed you the one he made. I think that's the only one I brought up for us to look at. He made really good baskets, and he told me that once in the 40s, somebody had um, stolen a bunch of baskets from one of those stands that was by the road. And they arrested someone, and that guy said, no, I didn't steal these, I made them. And so they took him to trial, and they called Elmer as a witness because Elmer said, I could tell you who made any basket that was made just by looking at it. And he said, I walked into the courtroom and that guy leaned over to his attorney and said, I plead guilty. If they're going to ask Elmer Price, I know that I'll be guilty. So, because Elmer could have said, no, I could tell you who made those baskets and it wasn't him, right? So he was pretty proud of that story. Here's just a couple other photos. That in the top right corner, there's Elmer, of course, sitting down. That's his brother, Jesse Price, who also made baskets. Not as many as Elmer. Um, and this image I always quite liked. In 1999, University Press of Mississippi published this book I wrote, Shenandoah Valley Folklife, and they used that image on the left as the cover. So it was kind of nice. I went to a book signing in Richmond. Somebody got this book and said, oh, come and sign. I was like, sure. And I went into the bookstore and the woman said, you look much older on the cover. This was 1999. Now I might actually, if I had a decent haircut, I might actually look like Elmer. But yeah, so he had uh, yeah, he was a good guy. I loved going and talking to all these guys. In fact, I learned a lot. At one point, I went to see Elmer, and he said, "Yeah, I got to stop. I can't. Arthritis is is killing me. It's making me stop. I was, sad. We talked for a while. And I went back by one time to see him, and he was in there making baskets like crazy. And I said, "What's up, man? How you making these baskets? What about the arthritis?" And he said, "Well, I went down here to the store and got me some WD-40, and I sprayed it on my hands and rubbed it in." And he said, "I'm good to go." It's like, okay. So you can learn a lot, from hanging around with people like this. So yeah, there's two brothers from that early photo. Here's Bill Cook. Um, he lived in Mount Jackson and had his shop there on next to his house in Mount Jackson. I mentioned that he could weave and or could form just about whatever he wanted to, and what he's making right there is an eel trap. Um, I don't know how many people used an eel trap, but he wanted to make one, so he did. So that's what he's doing in that image. So he's a first cousin to Elmer and Jesse. Um, his father, Max, was brother to Elmer and Jesse's mother, Rose. Um, So I'm looking at what I haven't told you yet. As I mentioned, yes, he could build just about any type. He was very innovative, very creative. He didn't just make like a round basket with a handle. He was always trying to do different stuff. And in fact, um, he built a 7-foot basket, and this is currently at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley. But Bill made that, and he would haul it around with him to shows. And he showed me, and I've never been able to find it. So if any of you are great researchers, Evan, um, and can find the Ripley's Believe It or Not that has Bill Cook in it, I'd love to find a copy of that. But he was in, those little cartoons that used to be in the Grit or whatever, Bill Cook. And so he built this basket. And he tells a funny story. If you have time sometime, you can go to this blog and read what Nick had to say about it. But Bill told me this story a long time ago that he built that basket, and then he got into it so much he just kept building it and got it finished, and then he couldn't get it out of his building. And so he thought about it a long time, and he and some of his buddies took one of the windows out of the shop. They had to take some of the cinder blocks away so that it would fit out. And then he took it around to shows. He also um, showed me a 14-foot basket he made just to see if he could do it. And it was not as formed like this, like a jug, but sort of straight sided up. Yes. Single long strip. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. It was a long. Oh yes, the question was if this is made out of single long strips. I suspect that Bill knew how to splice some of those together because they didn't use trees that would have been that tall, because it would have had to have been, twice the height in order to make the splits. Yeah. Um, right. Here's just some other forms that he made. He made up this form. He called it a tier basket, Tier. Also, one of the things that he did in the upper right, you can see these kinds of stripes. He soaked certain number of splits in walnut, uh, mashed up walnut hulls, and then he wove them into the baskets. And there he is, relaxing down in the bottom right. Now, he taught his son-in-law when I was there. His son-in-law was making baskets, Philip Sheets, who also lives in Mount Jackson. He was married to Bill's daughter, Kathy, and I couldn't find an image of her making baskets, but she also wove baskets. But primarily men were the weavers of the baskets. Lucy Cook is an exception. and Lucy's daughter-in-law, Shirley, who was married to James, also wove some baskets, and then Kathy sheets. Here's Ernest Nicholas. He's the one who made this smaller jug or feather basket. His father was William Bubby, who made the bigger one. He lived in Mayland, and he was a very informative guy too, kind of quiet. Um, he is a second cousin to Bill Cook and Elmer Price. Their grandparents or brothers and sisters, I think is how it goes. But anyway, they're related. Um, Kind of interesting. Ernest's father was named Nichols. Ernest is Nicholas. Ernest's brother Johnny was uh, Nichols too, And so I asked Ernest, "What's up with that?" And he said, "Well, they misspelled it on the marriage license, and we just decided to go with it." All right, so that's where that extra thing came from. Uh, his job was a school bus driver, and then he made baskets, and he was retired when I met him. But you can see he's there making some things. Excuse me. Here is another shot of his shop. Top right shows some of the different forms that he and his son made. You can see the splits over there on the right hand bottom corner. And one of the things about Ernest was that primarily he liked to make a square or a rectangular basket. Now he did make this round one when I asked him to. So again, going back to what Bill told me, yeah, Ernest could make a basket, and he made really good baskets. I got one that I bought way back then, and actually used it. Didn't have it like in a museum setting, and it's still quite functional. So his son, though, Greg, he liked to make round baskets. So between the two of them, they're like Jack Sprat, couldn't eat fat, but his wife couldn't eat lean, so they got it all done. Um, this is one of Greg's baskets. Very nice basket. Very good basket, tight basket that's in our collection. These Greg and Ernest were really nice. They took me to with them to hunt wild oak trees and to cut them down, but I had to more or less, sign a warrant that said I promised that I wouldn't tell anybody else where they got the trees, because it's very hard to get the trees. You can imagine these are not wealthy landowners, right? And they don't have stands of white oak trees, and they wanted to cut them when they were young, and so they had to really find people who had property who were willing to let them cut a tree, and or a stick. That's what they called them, a stick. And this is just one image on the right of Greg literally pulling the tree apart. Right, that's what they would do. Um, I brought this in, and it's an incomplete uh, piece of a split, and you can probably see the width there. That is very narrow. They would have split that at least another time or two to make the very thin weavers that they used. Then they would, leave them uh, thicker if they were making the rim or a handle or something like that. But they were obviously very adept. Now, if you look at this, I think it shows up there. This is some really fine work, and you can come up and look at these, afterwards. But just really nice, fine splits, and I never found that any of them were bad at it, to be sure. This is a running basket that Bubby Nichols made in the 1940s. So you see that form became part of the tradition of basket making to this basically extended family of basket makers. Here's Johnny Nichols and his wife Dorothy. They lived in Elkton. Guess what? Johnny liked to make round baskets, and that's what he made. Fantastic, sturdy baskets. Um, in fact, that day they said, "Here, we want to give you a basket," and they filled it up with vegetables from the garden and gave it to him. He's a very, very nice people. Um, and here's James Cook, who lived in Luray. As I said, he and his wife Shirley made baskets. We have a couple of this basket. This one was made by James Cook. Also very nicely made. Um, he actually went out and did some demonstrating. In fact, that exhibit that I was talking about from 95, I think it was 1995 or 93. It was the 93 exhibit that I did here. I had him come and he set up outside in the grass and made baskets, and it was really good. One time I was helping lead a tour from the Frontier Culture Museum of folk spots in the valley, and I had arranged that we would stop by his shop, and it was a big Trailways bus or whatever full of people, and they got out and they bought every single basket he had, and he was so excited. And every time I saw him after that, he would say, "Where's the bus?" So it was fun. One other person that I interviewed briefly is Stanley Nicholson, and he set up on Route 29 near Culpeper in Madison County, and he was straight from a family that got moved out. His parents were moved out of the park, and this is something that he continued to do and would set up on 29 over there and sell baskets. I don't really know anything about him, sorry to say, except that day that I stopped and chatted with him. I want to skip some stuff. Okay, one other guy, and Clyde Jenkins. Some of you may know Clyde Jenkins. As far as I know, he's the last person who builds a white oak basket in these parts. I say as far as I know, there could be other people. There are people who know how to do it. I think they just don't do it. It's very time consuming and hard work. But Clyde, I know, is I believe is still working. I saw him a couple of years ago. He was doing the Folklife apprenticeship with the Virginia Folklife Program, where he was teaching people how to make baskets. So he's still at it, I believe. Oh yeah, this is my technical slide. It doesn't show up so well, but I wanted you to have some practical knowledge when you left. So the image on the left is an image of the inside of this basket. And if you're a basket person, you know that some baskets really come up in the middle. They have a real sharp rise. It doesn't show up so well in the image. The image on the right is from this basket, obviously much newer, and it's flatter. I can't really show you from up here, but you're welcome to come and look. And what I want you to see here is this is a way you can date baskets approximately, because the system on the left is the old system. They used I want to say 16 splits, and so they would stack them all up like this and then weave them. And in order to get it together tight like that, it would come up like this. Sometime I would say in the 1920s, these basket makers figured out, you know what? If we start out with wider splits and then weave a little bit, and then we split that split, we don't have that big thing in the middle. And so that's how all of these newer baskets are made. So probably a basket like this is 1920, 1920s or earlier, based on that aspect of it. Those are resources if you're interested. You don't have to memorize. So I wanted to leave you with one quotation here. Make sure I get it right. I think yeah. So Bill Cook, obviously someone who was well-spoken, said to me one time when I asked him, well, can you use something else besides white oak? He said, don't even talk to me if it's not white oak. No, that was it, you know. So unfortunately, all of those people, except for Greg Nicholas and Philip Sheets, have passed on now, but we have a nice collection of their baskets in the museum here, and some are on display down in the exhibit. And yeah, so if you have any questions or points, yeah. Okay. The question is, did every basket maker go and get his own materials? And what was the process? The answer is yes. They would go get a tree, a stick, like I said, or 3 or 4, bring them back. They would first split it in quarters, and then take those quarters, and we saw here on the right in this slide, excuse me, Greg Nicholas pulling apart. So he would pull it apart, and that's what it was. It was just a series of pulling it apart until, you know, you get down to here. So this is one that ran off, and so they were just threw it aside and said, oh, you can have it if you want it. But they would pull it like this, and then sometimes they would, if it was a piece maybe, you know, this big around, they would use a shaving horse and a draw knife to smooth it down a little bit, and then they would get a pocket knife and peel them off. And I tried to do that. They all were very happy to have me give it a try, just so they could laugh at me, because I could never pull one off, you know. But they could just like sit there all day and pull those strips off. Yeah. So yes, it's like that quotation at the beginning, you know, Bill Cook saying, I like to tear a tree apart and put it back together the way I want. And really, that's what he did, or all of these guys. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, Pat. Yes. Well, they would split it in the quarters first, and then they probably would I mean, it could be that it was one of those barks, I can't remember, that sort of was, you know, a looser bark or something, but they probably used the shaving horse for that too. The question was, how did they get the bark off of the tree? Cheryl? Okay, the questions are, what's the oldest basket that is from this region, and did different families just have someone who can make baskets? The answer to the first question is, I don't know what the oldest basket is that's around here, because, you know, people used them originally, and they would wear out, of course, and go away. And I do not think that it was a common craft. It was just like any other. Not every farm had a blacksmith or a stonemason or something. It was a craft that was a specialty, I think. Yeah. they soak them before they build the basket? Yes, so the question was, do they work the trees when they're green or seasoned, and do they soak the splits? Green, they use it when it's green. They would, one, I remember Greg and Ernest had like an old piece of carpet that they would make wet, and they would just keep that on top of all the logs. Another guy told me that if he found a stand and he cut more than he could use in time, he would put them in his neighbor's pond so that they were wet. But then when they would go to make the very fine splits, the weavers they called them, um, they would in fact soak them in a pan of water, and then the final thing they would do before weaving with it was they would take it, and they usually would have a patch of leather on their thigh and take a very sharp knife and pull it like this to smooth it out, and then uh, use it. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. Question was, how did they sign their work? I think, excuse me, originally they didn't sign their work because they were just making baskets. And then when Cody and Lucy Cook were in Williamsburg and they sort of became famous and they came back to Luray, I think they started, if people would ask them to sign their name on a basket. Um, what I noticed was after I started talking with these guys, and and I would go out and I would speak about this, and I published some things because I didn't mention this, but one of the problems they were having was the gypsy moth was in its heyday, and it was eating primarily white oak trees, and so they were having trouble getting trees, and I was trying to do kind of conservation and work, I guess, or raise awareness to do that. And so people became more and more aware of these basket makers. And if you look at most of these, you'll see that they did uh, put their name on them. Some of them use pencil. Um, Elmer Price, this one is signed E. Price 6493 on the handle with, it looks like a Sharpie or something. Um, so they did various things. Greg Nicholas had one of those little like electric pen things, and he very neatly wrote his name here. Some of them, like James Cook, would just put JWS on it with a pencil. Sometimes he would put JWS and Shirley Cook. But yeah, there's variety of whatever they had handy, maybe. Jeff? Where Indiana concrete possible baskets to me. That's pretty unique to our. No, I think they're certainly in the Appalachian region there are other basket makers, parts of Pennsylvania where there's hardwood, they would make them, but you can tell different styles. There's a form that's called um, like rod. They used rods. They still used white oak, but they would have a little die that they would pull it through, and it would make rounds. And you probably have seen those very hard, really tightly woven rod baskets. And there are some that people say are from here in the valley, and they very well might be. I know that there were a lot in Pennsylvania who were making that. When I did the second survey with basket makers, I went all over Virginia to try and find basket makers, and I was in Galax down in the Southwest, and I was in um, down in the South Side where there were basket makers who were doing different things, but they were still, cutting trees, pulling them apart, putting them together. Yeah. Evan? Is this an old world practice that came over, or is this something that developed among one ethnic group? I don't think it's unique. The question is if this is an old um, um, tradition, old world tradition, or something unique to America. And I mean, I think all civilizations probably have baskets. Um, in Great Britain, I know they use willow a lot. Um, but to go back to the beginning, Nicholson, who came from England, was a basket maker. He had to know how to do something. So I don't know what he was doing there, but certainly availability of natural resources here would affect what was being made. Mm-hmm.
In your research, did you encounter any indigenous First Nations who were that?
Question was if I encountered any indigenous people making baskets. No, I did not. But I was pretty well focused in on the white oak tradition. Mm. Yeah, sweetgrass. Yeah, that's definitely an African tradition. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. The sweetgrass tradition down there. Yes. Yeah. Cheryl? Mm, that's a good question that I probably knew the answer to at one time. The question was how many baskets on average could come out of a tree, out of a stick. Yes. Um, I would hate to estimate it because they might use one tree and say, okay, I need a bunch of splits, and so to do this, or I'm going to work on weavers today and use a tree up making weavers. So I don't think they ever just started with a tree and set out. It became kind of like, like not assembly line, but there was you made these parts, then you made these parts, then you made these parts, then you built the basket.
I have a couple of comments from the online audience. One person is curious about why you're focusing on the men if you also met the women for the women building.
Yes. Well, when the two women that I knew who built baskets were Shirley Cook, James Cook's wife, and Kathy Sheets, Bill Cook's daughter. And neither one of them were involved with the getting out of the materials, but were um, involved with weaving the baskets. And it reminds me of something else Bill Cook told me. Anyone can weave a basket. It's getting out the materials that's the hard work. Also, the women, when I would go to do the interviews, were seldom around. And so they were not available for me to necessarily document as part of the tradition. But it's a good question. Yeah, but for the most part, the men were making the materials and putting them together. Yeah.
And then back to the 7-foot tall baskets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Howard.
Oh, cool.
The big basket was made in 2 parts. The first he made the first itself in 1972. The basket itself in 72. Built a separate base around in 1976 because it was at stake. But then he said he thinks he may have misunderstood the question. So the splits are woven horizontally. I mean, the question was about it being so tall. So how do you get the height from?
Yeah. The splits, the splits to my knowledge, are the wider pieces that are going, let's say, vertically, and the weavers are what they weave in between the splits.
Catch an eel.
A big one, yes.
Trying to get a picture.
Oh, okay. The splits are the part that sort of make the skeleton, as one way to think of it, and the weavers are what is woven in horizontal.
Let's see if any other comments. Have you woven a basket or harvested materials?
No, I have not. As I said, the basket makers enjoyed seeing me try to do it because everyone thinks it's something easy, and yeah, I mean it's a standard joke. I'm sure we've all heard, like, oh, I had a course in basket weaving in college, because it's all, seems easy, but it's not. So no, I have not made any. I documented the harvesting of some white oaks and certainly the splitting apart and the whole process, but never did do it myself because I couldn't peel the splits off.
Waste their wood. So I'm curious about their fingers.
Mhm.
Like super calloused? Did they get splinters? Did they just work with their hands or gloves? How did they do this?
Yeah, no, none of them wore gloves. So yeah, they had Band-Aids on hand. And yes, they had hands that were particularly rough, calloused, yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I thought when you showed us the bottoms of the baskets, you were going to say you date like rings.
That's a good one.
Thank you for all the great questions. I thought it was really great the way you wove together the history. And the people, it just encompasses everything that we do here at Rocktown History. So now basket weaving is our metaphor. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for our donation buckets because these programs are free, but we always appreciate some extra help. And for people online, you can go to rocktownhistory.org and there's a donate button. So convenient. So thank you everyone for coming. Happy spring. Oh, I should mention next month is going to be a gallery opening. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be entering the baseball season with some baseball history. So we're pretty excited. Okay, thank you so much again.
Thank you all.